Really delighted to be able to welcome all of you to this important debate that we're co-hosting with Bond. As some of you may have picked up, there's a referendum in a couple of weeks' time. And many issues have been debated in the context of that referendum, everything from regulations of bananas to house prices and many other things. This debate is about something different. It's about whether and how the referendum will have a material bearing on the UK's ability to exercise leadership in international development. There hasn't been sufficient discussion of that, in my view, in the referendum. This evening we have an opportunity to put that right. I think there's a broad agreement that whatever the outcome, it will matter a great deal for Britain's role in leading debates, not just on aid, but on trade, on security and on foreign policy in areas that will affect some of the poorest people in the world. We're very privileged to have 4 people with us tonight who have thought long and hard about the issues at stake, and we'll hear from them shortly. I'm also absolutely delighted to be handing over to Razia Iqbal, who's going to host the event. They're parliamentarians, but we don't have John Bercow to call them to order. But we have Razia, who will do an even better job. And Razia, as many of you will know, has some 25 years' experience with the BBC presenting flagship programmes both on TV and on radio. So, Razia, over to you.
Thank you very much. And a very warm welcome from me too. As Kevin said, today we're going to have a debate on whether Britain can be a global leader outside the European Union. The national debate so far being played out on television screens, on radio and in newspapers has been dominated by the economy and immigration, both incredibly important subject areas. But what we're going to be looking at today is international development, foreign policy, security, trade and climate change. The debate in the last day or so has also been described as incredibly acrimonious. And there's been a real, some would argue, a kind of nastiness that's kind of come to the fore. I'm hoping that today's debate here is going to be anything but, although I do hope that it will be both fast-paced and dynamic. We have got 4 speakers with us. Crispin Blunt, MP, Conservative Member of Parliament and Chair of the Select Committee on Foreign Affairs. All of these people have got a huge amount of experience in lots of different areas, but I'm just going to give you a quick, just one title, if that's all right with all of you. Mike Gapes, Labour Member of Parliament and Member of the Select Committee on Foreign Affairs. Peter Lilly, Conservative Member of Parliament and Patron of Conservative Friends of International Development. And Alison McGovern, Labour Member of Parliament and former Shadow Minister for International Development, Education and Treasury. I'm just going to quickly run through the kind of format, because I think it's really important that you all understand. Each of the speakers are going to open with a 3-minute statement, starting with those backing the Leave camp. We've just done a quick coin toss outside, and Crispin Blunt is going to start for the Leave camp. Mike Gapes is then going to speak for Remain. Peter Lilly for Leave, followed by Alison for Remain. They will then examine. They're going to have 3 minutes exactly, and I'm going to be very strict. There'll be a minute warning and then a bell at 3 minutes, so they will have to stop speaking. We will then examine some of the issues that have come up, and then we've got some experts sitting in the front row who are going to start us off with the conversation that we hope will take place within the room. If you are joining us online, a very warm welcome to you. You can send through your questions. I've got an iPad here, which I hope will start coming up with questions, and then we will wrap up with a 2-minute statement from each of the speakers. If you are with your smartphones at the ready, I would encourage you to tweet at #GlobalDevBrexit. And so let's hear whether our speakers believe that the UK could be a global leader outside the European Union. 3 minutes. Let's start with you. Crispin Blunt, please.
Thank you very much, Razia. On the 23rd of June, I want us to make a choice between 2 ideals. Britain as a committed member of a great project to secure peace and cooperation in Europe, a sense of European identity to complement our national and British identities, or the alternative global vision, Britain with its unique history, culture and connections, reinforced by national economic strengths that are global, not regional, could embrace a truly international identity. And regrettably, the choice facing us on the 23rd of June, there is only one positive future role for our country. Remain offers a grimmer and small-minded defence of our deal. We would be working to stop our partners developing the shared sovereignty they need to deliver. And for Britain, our position is also negative, and it's reflected in this referendum campaign. The positive arguments for peace and security in Europe, cloaked in the idealism of Europe's founders, are almost completely absent. Instead, we trumpet our semi-detached status. Except our deal in the long run will either be unpicked or our refusal to allow our partners in the European Union to sort out their position will bring the whole thing crashing down. Now we have the euro, or at least the euro area. It must move towards some kind of United States of Europe or it will collapse. An accountable body will have to vote tax and benefits across Europe to support the Eurozone. And unsurprisingly, many of our partners also want a common defence capability, which makes complete sense if your interests are closely aligned. Therefore, I will be voting to leave. I believe it's in the long-term interests of both Britain and the EU to do so. I want us to have a role as a country that is positive and a national strategy that is consistent with our history, culture and population. Yes, we would lose the benefits of being part of an emerging superstate, but our vision would be global. We would remain a development superpower. Our hard power will give us the weight to count in the world, if not to command, and if our allies, the United States of America and our European partners, are in agreement, then it is almost certain that our interests will be covered, even if we are not at the table. So there is only one positive vision, I believe, on choice on the 23rd of June. It's completely consistent with a 0.7% of our GDP being given to development, completely consistent with the kind of national identity and commitment that has meant that commitment has been made by the politicians of the United Kingdom well before this debate took place. So I invite you to embrace a positive role for our country, a continuing role as a development superpower in the world, and vote to leave on the 23rd of June.
Crispin Blunt, thank you very much. Mike.
Thank you. The vote on June the 23rd is not about how we are today. It's going to set the direction of our country for decades to come. It's going to shape our international standing and our role in the world. And the Foreign Affairs Select Committee in a recent report looked at this issue, and one of its conclusions was leaving the EU could result in the UK becoming a smaller or less influential international player, especially in the context of increasing pressure from rising powers on the post-1945 global economic and governance frameworks. This century, we have the rise of China, the rise of India, Indonesia, Vietnam. There is a significant economic shift in the world. Yet the post-1945 world order is very much not reflective of that. The current institutional frameworks, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, even the United Nations, established with great British influence after 1945, are under pressure. And there is particular pressure about reform in the UN system. At the moment, the UK and France, which work together very closely in the UN, are seen by the other EU states to broadly reflect European interests. If we leave the European Union, that will no longer be the case. If we have an acrimonious divorce from the European Union, then other European countries will not regard the UK in the same way as they do now. Outside the EU, there will be issues about the veto and our role in the Security Council. There will also be a question about what we do to work in the world. At present, we have the best of both worlds. We are both an international player through the UN system through the other international institutions. It is not a choice of Europe or the rest of the world. It is a choice of how do we maximise our influence as a member of the European Union, as well as our world view and our world role in the Commonwealth and in the United Nations system. That's why we should vote to remain in the European Union. It's in our national interests, it's in Europe's interests, and it's the interests of the world as a whole.
That bodes well under the 3 minutes, Mike. Thanks very much. Peter Lilly.
Can I first of all issue a disclaimer? I'm chairman of Trade Out of Poverty, which is the organisation which brings me most frequently to ODI, but I'm speaking in a purely personal capacity. It's an all-party group, and my co-chairmen don't necessarily share my views. Secondly, can I address the presumption on which this debate is based? The idea that the purpose of British policy is to exercise influence and leadership in the world. That is a hangover from imperialism that's prevalent both on the left and the right. It's arrogant, it's conceited, and it's based on self-delusion. The rest of the world is not waiting to be led by us, and we shouldn't kid ourselves that it is. The purpose of our policies should be to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. If our policy is to spend 0.7% of GDP, of national income on aid, we should do that because it's the right thing to do. My brief said it gave us tremendous influence. I've not noticed anyone following us doing that. How much does America spend? How much does Germany spend? How much does France spend? How much have they increased it since we reached 0.7%, zilch? So, but it's the right thing to do, so let's do it. Climate change. If it's the right thing to take action to minimise global warming, I have some reservations about that, but if it's the right thing, let's do it. Let's not pretend that the rest of the world is going to follow us because we do it, or is going to follow us if we inflict greater pain on ourselves than other countries are inflicting on themselves. Now, I'd assume that this debate was primarily about aid and development, since that's what ODI is about. There's relatively little difference between being members of the EU and being outside. But if we're outside, we will be in a better position to do the right thing because it's the right thing. We at present have to give 10% of our total aid budget, what we do, via the EU. Claire Short, when she was Secretary of State for International Development, said that the least efficient way of delivering aid was through the EU. It was inefficient in itself, and the choice of countries was heavily political towards countries neighbouring on Europe or that they wished to acquire as future members, the biggest single item being to Turkey. We will be able to choose our priorities, which I hope will be based on development needs and not on the political machinations of the European Union. Secondly, trade. As I say, I'm chairman of Trade Out of Poverty, but speaking in a personal capacity. I've been advocating that the developed countries of Europe, of the OECD, should be opening up their markets unilaterally to the products and services of the poorest countries. That's what we ought to be doing. We've been unable to persuade the rest of Europe to do that because a lot of European countries are frankly protectionist, and its highest tariffs, although the average tariff that the EU would exercise against us if we were exporting to them against the WTO is only 2.5%. Their highest tariffs are against the goods from poorest countries, high labour-intensive goods like clothing, food, and so on. We would be able to open our markets to those goods from poor countries unilaterally and set an example. If the rest of the world wants to follow us, they will. If they don't, they won't. So on the basis of trade, on the basis of aid, on the basis of common sense, we should be following policies which are right in themselves, not deluding ourselves that we somehow lead Europe. They're not really waiting to be led by us, and they're certainly not going to be led by a country which doesn't accept the main purposes of that project.
Peter Lilly, thank you very much. Alison.
Thank you, Razia. And I suppose I too, like Peter, would like to sort of approach this question specifically from a development perspective. Others have talked about the consequences for Remain or a leave vote in terms of the UN or foreign affairs. But I just want to ask us to consider for a moment that suppose you were going to vote in the referendum merely on the basis of caring about the poorest people in our world. I don't think I suffer from a kind of post-imperialist hangover, but suppose that that was the simple motivation behind the vote. How then would you choose? Well, I want to offer 3 reasons to remain. Firstly, I think the poorest people in our world require, above all else, basic services, schools, hospitals, roads, plumbing, sanitation. And we know that the best way to provide basic services for people is through taxation, where people in that country and companies provide the government with the means to deliver those basic services through taxation. Well, that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because I wonder how we're going to keep on taking on global corporations that want to avoid tax that disproportionately hits the poorest countries in the world if we remove ourselves from the group of countries that is trying to stand up to other more powerful countries in the world that are holding back on tax. Secondly, on security, by 2018, the majority of people in extreme poverty will live in conflict zones or fragile states, including 36% of all children outside school. So what those people need, living in the most dire poverty, I believe, is the opportunity to prevent that conflict. And that's why I think it's right that we remain as partners in the EU and also to provide people with refuge and sanctuary. And finally, on trade, I would just ask people to consider whether the best way for a poor country to become a rich country is to trade. Now, who will provide poor countries with a better trade deal? The UK standing on its own when we've had global trade talks fail, or by us persuading our partners in the European Union that EU deals must be pro-poor in future. I simply think that it's not realistic to expect that we can really work to help the poorest countries in the world outside the EU. I think we are stronger and we will have a better, more effective pro-poor strategy if we stay inside.
Thank you all very much. Let's just pick up on the last point that Alison made about trade, because it's quite clear that from what Peter Lilly was saying and what you were saying, you're clearly at odds. You see the World Trade Organization as enough in terms of the way in which Britain might exist outside the European Union. Is that a correct analysis of what you say, even though...
Well, yes, of course, 132 countries in the world trade with the EU under WTO rules. We would be joining the majority. However, we weren't talking about Britain's position of trade. We were talking about poor countries' position. We are in a better position to help those poor countries if we can unilaterally lift our high tariffs on their goods, the high tariffs the EU proposes, and which has continued to operate despite our alleged influence over them for 43 years. We could do it overnight, and we could do it easily, because by and large, there'd be no objection in this country to doing so. All 3 parties are in favour of it, whereas at least 10 states in the European Union are against it. So let's not kid ourselves that staying in, we will influence them to do something they haven't done for the last 43 years. Coming out, we will offer the world, the poor countries, the 5th biggest economy in the world, Britain, will offer free access to their goods. That can't be bad.
Alison?
I hear what Peter says, and I love the thought that there is, unanimity across the House of Commons in taking action like this. That would be my first point of scepticism, I suppose. My second point, the 0.7 debate on aid that we had wasn't exactly straightforward, but I suppose I can't see that trade deal, that'd be unprecedented. With Britain effectively withdrawing from the EU and expecting just to turn up at the WTO and be accepted, and that we would just be able to call terms in that way, and that it would be simple and straightforward to do. I suppose I'm deeply sceptical about how easy that process would be. And meanwhile, we've got a challenge in development terms with conflict in Syria and other places proximate to us in Europe that we ought to be a part of. And the only way that we're going to get real, actual, practical help, I think, either on trade or on conflict, is to do the hard thing and to work with our partners in Europe.
Just as a point of fact, the World Trade Organization has tried for the last 14 years to extend trade rules, and the Doha round was abandoned at the last attempt in Nairobi in December. Mike Gapes, do you want to come back on this, the point that Peter Lilly makes about this, the whole premise of the debate being part of a kind of imperial, post-imperial hangover?
Well, this is an interesting question. What kind of people are we? What kind of country do we want to be? Do we want to defend the international values of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the global institutions that were established after the Second World War? Or do we want to help those people who want to undermine those, Putin in particular, but some other countries that have a view of the world which is basically autarkic and nationalistic? I think we have got a real risk here that if we leave the European Union, we weaken the forces that are in defence of the cooperative model of the world and move towards a more nationalistic bloc mentality, which is not outward looking. The European Union is not the USSR or any caricature of it. The European Union is a free association of democratic countries, and it has global influence, and one of the reasons it's so successful in attracting countries that want to join it is because it has those values. We weaken those values if we leave.
Crispin Blunt, what do you make of that, given that you've made a case for an international identity if the UK leaves?
I think we need to shoot the Putin Aunt Sally. Britain is absolutely committed to the values Mike spoke about promotion of international human rights and the relief of poverty, and the institution of the European Court of Human Rights and the Convention is not in debate here. We're going to remain. There's a very substantial majority in the House of Commons for us to remain part of the ECHR, and what that means for Russian human rights activists and the cover they get from the functioning part of the Russian justice system, which is obviously wholly imperfect, but they do get some protection from that. And to suggest that we're going to be somehow detached from those values because we leave the European Union is just simply wrong. I think we're in a much stronger position to actually be much more internationalist. One only has to look at the scandal over decades, I would say, to the common agricultural policy, which has protected our own farmers in Europe at the expense of the one area where the developing world has a clear advantage over us in terms of price of labour and everything else in order to have a free market there. And that's the area we have chosen perhaps to most protect most of all. We would free ourselves of that, and we would then begin the process of making a real contribution of growth through trade of the developing world, with the internationalism that supports Britain spending 2.7% on GDP on aid is the same internationalism that would then support free trade and opening our markets to those parts of the world who will really get a benefit from it.
Do either of you want to come back on that point?
After you, Mike.
Just my point about Putin is that Putin's agenda is to weaken European cooperation. Putin has been financing the Front National in France. His RT television channel, which you can all watch on Freeview, very few people do, I'm glad to say, but nevertheless. The reality is it's a constant undermining of the cooperation, calling, for example, a statement today made by their foreign ministry about sanctions which have been imposed following the annexation of Crimea, which are agreed by the European Union. There is an ideological battle here. And frankly, if we come out of the European Union, we weaken the forces of cooperation and the rule of law, and we actually strengthen those people who want to weaken that European Union.
Do you think that Russia would pay attention to a United Kingdom that's outside the European Union? I mean, will the UK be able to maintain its special relationship with the US outside the European Union?
Yes, obviously, if the European Union becomes effectively a single state, a centralised state, which is its objective, and if we're dragged into it, then we'll cease to have any influence or any direct relationship with Russia or anybody else, any more than Texas has any direct relationship with Russia. It's a big province in the United States of America. We should, Crispin pointed out that Europe is going in the direction of a centralised Europe. They've got to prop up the euro, and they wanted to in any case. We've got to decide what our relationship should be with it. We can either become a province in that superstate, some people want that, or we can, in which case we'd be like Texas in the United States, or we can be like Canada, trading, cooperating within the North American free trade area with the United States, but remaining an independent country. Who has greater influence, at least in the sense of the ability to do their own thing, Texas or Canada? Do you want us to be like Texas, or do you want us to be like Canada in a free trade arrangement with the rest of Europe, but cooperating and making our own decisions?
Let's just respond to that specific point, either Alison or Mike.
Well, if I may, it's a sort of clever argument, I suppose, to posit Texas against Canada. But the fact is, we are not really, the North American analogy I don't really think works. And one of the reasons why I don't think it works is because of some of the security reasons that Mike and others have raised. I think that our interests, are not, they're not the same as those countries, because we have one significant conflicts in the world happening on just the other side of Europe, and those conflicts are having an impact on the poorest people of the world in terms of migration flows, something we've not talked about yet. And we have the ability through Europe, in fact, it's lacking at the moment. Britain should be leading more on the migration crisis, and we have the ability through our partnership in the European Union to deal with that. Let me also say on the common agricultural policy and free trade generally, it's easy to paint a picture of the idea of Britain as a free trade champion abandoning agricultural subsidies as being pro-poor. But if that was a Britain that went around the world, arguing for total free trade that had no standards or no guarantees for the poorest people in the world, that wouldn't help at all. That would simply create a race to the bottom, and we would have no break on global companies that wanted to exploit workers. It's much better, I think, in the heady days of globalization that we are in, to partner with other countries and to try and agree across countries what the standards are that all people should expect at work and in how they're dealt with by companies. That's a much better way to make trade not just entirely free, but also fair.
Let's talk about security, because it's connected to the migration issue that you brought up, Alison. Crispin Blunt, what do you make of the context that we're living in now? How would the UK benefit from leaving the EU when sharing of intelligence when it comes to security is clearly likely to be more effective than going it alone?
Well, the sharing of intelligence that happens principally is through the Five Eyes, through the United States, Britain, Canada, New Zealand and Australia. And that's the premier set of intelligence relationships. And strangely enough, they're the countries that have the closest kind of common law and history with ourselves over the last couple of centuries. And the development of intelligence sharing in Europe is problematic. It's been quite slow because we, in particular, have been very suspicious of this being done at the European level of the European institutions, and we've probably been the obstacle in actually creating an effective European intelligence service at the European level, because we're neuralgic about this, as we're neuralgic about developing a European defence identity. And we're probably also fairly neuralgic about a European development identity being developed at a real scale to try and turn Europe into a development superpower. And there is an argument here that I believe is that the United Kingdom, as a large player in the current European Union, is strangely enough stopping it actually developing these necessary shared sovereignties, shared powers, and everything else, in order to become a more effective force in the world because of our complex history and our complex series of relationships in the world and our semi-detached relationship with the whole European project. And I wish that this referendum was forcing us to make our mind up. Are we either in this or are we out of it? And what we've got is half in, half out, as against out. And there is only one clear vision there about playing a positive role in the world rather than constantly being the naysayer to our European partners on many of these issues.
Crispin talks about the problems when it comes to a common defence policy. It is arguable, isn't it, that NATO is much more important than the EU could ever be?
I'm on the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. Last weekend I was at a meeting in Tirana, Albania, where when the Prime Minister of Albania, Edi Rama, in response to my question, said, please don't leave, we want you to stay. The whole meeting got up and applauded. The mood in the rest of NATO, and this is cross-party, is overwhelmingly that we should stay in the European Union and that we should work for the EU and NATO to work in a more cooperative way together. The EU has got some defence cooperation and security cooperation. It's underdeveloped. We've ensured that it is not duplicating what NATO does. As soon as we leave, there will then be a push by some other countries to have duplication with NATO, which would be wasteful and complicating. Secondly, on the wider security question, Crispin talks about the Five Eyes. Australia, Canada, New Zealand, United States and ourselves. All those other countries, their leaders have said they want us to remain in the European Union, not leave it. Nowhere around the world, in the Commonwealth too, do other governments want us to leave because they recognise we play a role in making the EU outward looking and cooperating with other regions and other countries. And the head of Europol, who happens to be British, Rob Wainwright, has also said publicly that we should be in the EU. If we leave Europol and we leave the European arrest warrant, our security will be weakened and we can have the best of both worlds by remaining in the EU.
Alison, did you want to say one?
I just wanted to add, I mean, Mike's made an excellent case, I think, why, you know, our partners in other organisations like NATO would want us to remain in the European Union because it assists them achieve the things that they need to. Because it's the right level of cooperation to help get things done in the real world. But equally, you know, I just wanted to challenge Crispin's idea that what we're trying to achieve through aid is to become a development superpower. I never agreed with Conservative Secretaries of State when they said that, and I still don't, because the point that both Peter and I have made about what's right for the poorest people in the world, you know, it's right not because it gives Britain some kind of voice in the world or some kind of pride. It's right because our world will be more successful, more productive, without the extreme poverty that holds us back. So I come back to the question of, it's not about some idea, some, you know, ideologue's vision for the sake of things. It's to do with how practically we can lift millions of people out of poverty and give them the basic services that they need. And our aid is good in this country, UK aid is good quality, but actually working in concert with others around the world, most especially the European Union, but others, it's even better.
Just before we turn to our panel of experts with their questions, Peter Lilly, what do you make of what Michael has said about the roll call of not just institutions but governments who are urging the United Kingdom not to leave?
Some of them think it's in their interests that Britain subordinates its interests to those of the European Union, and they may well be right. Others simply have been asked by the British government to make these statements. It's an absolutely costless way of winning a few brownie points with David Cameron, and so they say these sort of things. But we ought to be looking at what's in our interests, and in this case, our moral interest in helping poor people and poor countries, and saying, is that helped by being part of a protectionist group, which means that our market excludes the products of poor countries? Is that helpful? I don't think it is. And I don't see poor countries queuing up and saying, please, will other countries join and raise tariffs against our goods? Isn't it nice that Britain has high tariffs against our goods? They don't say that. I don't think they would.
Okay, let's pause for a moment then.